Well, I'm Dr. Scott Smith, and I teach in the MA Christian Apologetics program as part of Talbot School of Theology. And I've been doing this now for well over 20 years. And I just want to share with you some things here about, some exciting things that I'm seeing happen here, in our program and in our sister program, the MA Science and Religion. Um, there's just I think, some cutting edge things, that we've been working on. Dr. Gutta, for example, in the Science and Religion program, brings a whole lot of expertise addressing artificial intelligence, philosophy of physics, and a whole number of other things that he's becoming quite the expert, in. Sean McDowell, working in all sorts of, key areas as well. And I want to share with you, one particular area, that I've been, working on for a while now. And I think that we are working on some cutting edge things here in these programs. And I just want to really encourage you to think about coming and studying with us. The thing I want to share with you today is talked about in this book that I did, Naturalism and Our Knowledge of Reality, Testing Religious Truth Claims. This came out originally with Ashgate, then it was republished, through Routledge. So out there with a very good publisher. And then the same set of ideas was reprinted, or a new essay actually done, in The Naturalness of Belief, a book with Lexington. Some new essays, arguing for the truth and the coherence of theism. Now, I've published on this topic, in at least 4 different, places. With some very solid academic publishers. And to date, no one has come back, and rebutted me or refuted, my arguments on this thing. So I think this is something really important, something I want to share with you that I think could really encourage you. And I want to encourage you to come, and join us, as we look at these kinds of things here. So the topic I want to look at is related to naturalism and knowledge. Can we really have knowledge on the basis of naturalism? So I want to explain that a little bit, and then we'll dive into it. Let me just give a little brief background on what naturalism is. For most of you, you've got, ideas of, what that would mean. In terms of what is real, naturalism is a view that says reality is basically made up of matter. It's all physical stuff. Or there could be, some room for some emergent mental, states like thoughts or beliefs or maybe experiences. But what these things would be is they emerge from the physical and depend for their existence upon the physical. They don't have any causal powers of their own. They're just free riders, on the physical. Now, on this view also, there are no places for souls or essences, which would be an immaterial, essential nature, something that, like the human soul, would be something that we'd all have in common as our common essential nature. On naturalism, there's no room for that. And that is the metaphysical basis, if you will, for Darwin's theory of evolution. So applied there, on his views, human origins there's no need to appeal to God, to account for how we came about. And there are no natural kinds, no essences, no natures. Basically, everything is just matter in motion. And in terms of how science should be done, naturalism has another implication. It's called a methodological naturalism. And that is, you should do your science, if you're going to be orthodox, in science, you should do it by bracketing out any immaterial sorts of entities from your scientific work, especially like appeals to God, angels, or souls, or anything like that. A related thing, that comes out of this is what's called the fact-value split. And this is one of my keen areas of interest. I think is one of the most deeply entrenched ideas in Western cultures, where their influence spreads as well. And the fact-value split is basically this. Science tells us what is real. Science has the corner of the market, giving us knowledge, about things. But when you come to things like ethics or religion, or maybe even the rest of the humanities, those things give us, at best, opinions and preferences, maybe just our values and things that we construct. Or possibly some people will allow that it may get some knowledge in those areas, but it's of a vastly inferior sort to the kind that science gives us. This is a mindset that I think is just axiomatic. It's taken as at an axiomatic level in Western cultures. And I think it's one of the greatest roadblocks, for Christians to really grow into the fullness of Christ, to grow into their discipleship, to the Lord. But here's a big what if. What if we actually found out that naturalism, which is the basis of the kind of orthodox science that supposedly has the corner of the market on knowledge, what if we found out we actually couldn't have knowledge based on naturalism? What if this received, widely embraced, just assumed to be true view actually turned out to be false? That's the question I want to propose here for us to look at. I want to do that by looking at one particular exemplar, Daniel Dennett. He's a major philosopher in neuroscience. He might be more commonly known as one of the new atheists, but Dennett teaches at Tufts University back east. He is a naturalist who I think tries to take very seriously the implications of natural selection, of Darwinian evolution. One of the things he tries to argue for is a thing called the intentional stance. Now, let me try to explain a little bit about that. When we think about things like our so-called mental states, things like having an experience of something, or I'm thinking about what I just ate for breakfast, or maybe my belief about who won last year's Super Bowl, or something like that. These things are all of or about things. And this feature of being of or about something is something that is called intentionality. Now, for Dennett, though, because of his commitment to the orthodox scientific view that's based in naturalism, he says that these qualities, this intentionality, this ofness or aboutness of our thoughts and beliefs and whatnot, they're not real. Those are mental sort of things, and those things are not real, according to what, the modern scientific view of reality. Instead, he says it's just an attribution or an interpretation or a conceptualization we make by adopting a tactic he calls the intentional stance. That is, it's a tactic to predict behavior. Now, let me try to illustrate that just to help it be a little more tangible. So here's an example of the intentional stance. Here are a couple of characters from one of my favorite shows, Star Trek. We've got Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock. And Spock is playing 3D chess with the ship's computer. So he is making his pieces to move in different places. And he reports that to the computer, and the computer then responds, with its own moves of its colored pieces. And what Dennett would say is going on here is that Spock is trying, or he believes that he can put the computer's king in check if he makes this move, and the computer responds, with that move. We can then attribute, to the computer the same basic intention or thought that if it makes this move instead in response to Spock's move, it can put Spock's king in check within like 5 different moves. Is that really going on here? Is the computer really thinking, about how to do these things? Is Spock, even doing that sort of stuff? No, says Dennett. These are just ways of talking, ways of interpreting the behavior so we can predict what their moves, their behaviors will be. We attribute to them having real intentionality, if you will, real thoughts and real beliefs, when really there are no such things. It just helps us predict behavior. And that's what Dennett's trying to say here, what's really going on. So let me give a little more idea here about Dennett's basic set of views here. For one, I think, and one of the things that impressed me about him is that he really tries to take natural selection quite seriously. So again, there are no souls, no essences, nothing like that on this view. No non-physical things like mental, beliefs or thoughts, this sort of thing. There's only physical stuff, including brains that do the hard work of processing our senses, inputs. And natural selection, he admits, is a totally blind process. There are no plans, that it's making, no intentions, no beliefs about, what should be done. There's no representing a thing to be a certain kind of way. That's not going on at all. Now, let me back up before I start assessing his views a little bit to say a little bit more about this thing called intentionality. It's a feature that is commonly thought of as being true of our thoughts or beliefs or our experiences of things, or our meanings even, our concepts. What did I mean when I wrote, a particular chapter in here and said certain things about Dennett's views? It's the meaning I had in mind, or it's what my words were about, a certain concept I had in mind. And these sort of things are always of or about something. They have that quality of intentionality. It's like a directedness towards something. The words in these books are representative of what I had in mind, what I was trying to convey, through those words. But we can think of things, that aren't real. I can think of what would have been the case if the San Francisco 49ers had won the Super Bowl in February 2023. Didn't happen, unfortunately, but I can still think about things that, aren't real. It's just that my thoughts don't get any further, but they still have this quality of being of or about something. So if that's the case, it doesn't seem that intentionality could be this sort of a physical thing, like Dennett says it must be. So intentionality seems to be what some have called, like Dr. J.P. Moreland, who helped mentor me here, he points out that it's one of the hallmarks of the mental, perhaps the hallmark, of the mental. Let me give you a little more about Dennett's basic ideas before we move into some assessment. Since mental states are not real, and nothing non-physical is real for him, and that's just consistent with Darwin's view of evolution, the qualities that mental states would have, like their intentionality, being of or about things, also wouldn't be real. Instead, for Dennett, there are only brain states that exist, and real physical patterns and behaviors that we take or interpret, to be of or about something. And again, just to underscore it, Dennett denies that there are any real essences. Now this becomes real important. So what would an essence be? An essence would be something that is typically thought to be something non-physical that's just simply true of something, like a person or maybe even a dog, but perhaps even a thought or a meaning, just because of what kind of thing that is due to its essential nature. But Dennett makes an important admission, and this is one of the reasons why I really like to focus on his views. He makes what I think a very key admission, and he's right, I think, on this. If there were essences, but of course there aren't on his view, but if there were, he says, there could be a deeper fact, as he puts it, that is something beyond just mere behavior. A deeper fact of the matter of what our thoughts are really about, or what someone really meant when they said this or that, or what kind of thing something really is. There would really be a deeper fact to what a thought is really about, or what I really meant when I wrote those chapters, in those books, that sort of thing. But Dennett then makes an important connection. He realizes something really important. He realizes that this has connections with Jacques Derrida, a major postmodernist, thinker, and his deconstructionist kind of thought. The idea is basically this, and Dennett basically echoes this. Because there are no essences, there's no intrinsic meaning in any sort of text. So what did I mean when I wrote my chapter here on Dennett? There is no meaning there, that Scott had in mind to be found. Instead, it's all interpretation. That's all it is. Just like we're trying to interpret Spock's behavior in moving those chess pieces. There is no deeper fact of what I really had in mind when I wrote those things, because there's no essence here, to those things. And Dennett admits the following too. Things like so-called thoughts, on his view, or even speech, these are behaviors or physical things, and they are what he calls brain writings, activities in the brain. And those things are just as much subject to interpretation as anything else. Everything that exists is a text that is subject to interpretation. Why? Because there are no deeper facts to anything. And if there were, they would define what something really is about, or what it really means. Now let me take a step back and just think for a minute here about what I think are some really interesting features about our mental states. Let me just focus, for example, on my thought about what I had for breakfast. A nice bagel with some flavored cream cheese on it and a nice yogurt. Good stuff. So my thought about my breakfast is my thought about those things, what I ate for breakfast. Let's notice something about that. That thought is particularized. That is, it's a thought about what I ate for breakfast. It couldn't be the same thought that it is and turned out, to have been about something else, like what I'm going to buy my wife for Christmas, let's say, or the classes we offer, in our programs. And here's another thing. For any sort of mental state, like that thought, or even an experience of something, it seems that they have to have that quality of being of or about something. You might try an experiment and just see if you could have a thought that is actually about nothing. And I don't think you can. I've tried it. To have a thought is always going to be about something, or a belief, will be in the same sort of way. And again, like I said, it seems like that thought about my breakfast could not have turned out to be about something else and still been the particular thought that it is. That is, due to what it's about, it seems to have an essence to it, a nature that defines it as that thought. And it couldn't have turned out to have been about my car, and perhaps a need for it to get a checkup, pretty soon from the mechanic. It would not be the thought that it is if it turned out to actually be about that. So for these reasons, it seems that thought, and I think thoughts generally, and beliefs, and even experiences, have an essence to them. Now, let's apply this another step further. Talking so far about thoughts and beliefs and whatnot, well, let's apply it to knowledge. Knowledge, typically, at least about facts of the, in the world, is thought to be justified, true belief. Because it's got belief as a necessary component of it, that beliefs always have this ofness or aboutness, this intentionality. So knowledge also, requires being of or about things. So if there is no way to preserve these mental states and their intentionality, their ofness or aboutness, we can't have knowledge. Now that's a big issue. So let's apply some of these things to Dennett now. What happens then to naturalism's claims about having knowledge, being able to give us knowledge on its basis about what is really the case, in the world, about the objective material world, and what is the brute facts about the way things really are? If it can't preserve the reality of beliefs with their intentionality, their being of or about something, it can't preserve knowledge. And so naturalism seems like it cannot give us knowledge. Now that's serious, because this seems to be, as I said earlier, naturalism is, I think, deeply understood, especially in terms of modern science and the prestige given to it. We think and been taught to believe that we can know reality based upon what naturalism says is real, when I think exactly the opposite is the case. Naturalism cannot preserve knowledge. Here's another point with this. Everything ends up being interpretation for Dennett, because, as he says, there are no deeper facts that undergird any sort of interpretation of reality or define something as what it is. So all we're doing is interpreting things. But how do we get started in interpreting, actual behavior in the world? Well, it assumes that there's something real there that we're actually able to access and interpret. But now, wait a minute, there's no deeper fact to any of those things either. So it seems that we end up with just interpretations of interpretations of interpretations without a way to even get started. Dennett seems to realize this, because he says, there's a threat here perhaps of a regress, not being able to get started in making interpretations, but it's a regress that just kind of peters out after a while. But I don't think he's right on that, because there is no basis for any deeper facts, because there are no essences, and he's right, because that's consistent with naturalism. So why does everything become an interpretation? Because there are no essences, no natural signs, if you will, like intentionality, that simply point to and are simply of or about something. And that ability to have those qualities requires essences. So it seems that, and even when I was talking about the example of my thought about what I was having for breakfast, it seems like there's an essence to that. It couldn't be the thought that it is, and it turned out to be about something else. Well, so here too, all the intentionality or the ofness or aboutness of any given mental state seems to be intrinsic or essential to that. Each one has, an essence. But without any deeper fact to anything, no essences, everything just becomes interpretations of interpretations of interpretations, and so on. And all because, again, naturalism denies that any essences or deeper facts, exist. So at best, naturalism can only give us interpretations. But it gets even worse, because without beliefs, there is no room for any knowledge. So why does this matter? Well, if there can't be any knowledge on naturalism, which is, naturalism is the orthodox view, or in today's orthodox science, then the fact side of the fact-value split is deeply mistaken. Because naturalistically grounded science can't give us knowledge of how things are in reality. And this takes away the perceived power of naturalism and the science that's been based upon it. And it opens the door, I think. Perhaps we've been far too quick to dismiss claims from religion and from ethics to have knowledge in those areas as well. Now That's one of my big areas of interest, and it's another book that I've written called In Search of Moral Knowledge, which is a text we use in our ethics class to help defend of how we can have knowledge, in ethics and help dislodge this fact-value split. So I would just like to really encourage you. This is just one example of some of the cutting edge things I think that we're doing here, in our program. Here's some different ways you could be in touch with us. My email there, or the General Apologetics email, which we'll get to both programs. Phone number as well as the website, you can look at. And at that website address, you can look at both Science and Religion and the MA Apologetics, programs. Thanks very much. I hope you'll join us.